If you find this kind of breakdown helpful, take a moment to subscribe so you can stay informed as these issues continue to unfold. Now fast forward to this week, and the picture looks very different. According to a new report from the New York Times, roughly $17 billion in federal disaster funding has been delayed over the past year. That is
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nearly a year ago, Secretary Noem visited western North Carolina to see the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene firsthand. That day, the Secretary told the crowd in Bat Cave, North Carolina, that, I quote, "The previous administration failed in many areas, and we're going to learn from that and do better." A sentiment that I shared wholeheartedly. Secretary Noem highlighted some of the actions taken in the early days of President Trump's second term to remove all the red tape that previously slowed the department down and western North Carolina's recovery. These actions were sorely needed, and I fully supported what she intended to do. Earlier this week, now let's fast forward a year. Earlier this week, the New York Times reported that approximately $17 billion, with a B, in federal disaster funds for states has been delayed over the past year. The article states the delay stemmed from a directive issued by Ms. Noem in June that said any expenditure over $100,000 or more must be approved by her office, which oversees the disaster agency, to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. The bottleneck includes money that already had been approved by regional FEMA offices for things like debris removal and repairs to roads, bridges, water, and sewer systems. This is being delayed, folks. This new reporting sadly confirms what the people of western North Carolina have known for the past year. Mr. President, this chart shows a comparison between FEMA obligations and outlays in Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence under President Trump in his first term. The obligations and outlays to date for Hurricane Helene under the second Trump administration are these marks. Down here is what I would call in my management consulting days best practice. We had a storm, Florence and Matthew. We knew what the state and local governments needed. We got it out without any delay. Now, under Noem's leadership, which is supposed to be more efficient, more effective, and more responsive to the disaster in western North Carolina and the other states that were affected, looked like the EKG of somebody who's having a heart attack. It makes no sense. This chart shows a comparison between FEMA obligations and outlays for Hurricanes Matthew and Florence under the first Trump administration with the FEMA obligations and outlays to date for the Helene under the second Trump administration. The data clearly shows that something is seriously wrong here. Under Secretary Noem's lack of leadership, FEMA has invented an entirely new set of bureaucracies, the likes of which I've never seen. And I'm in a state that deals with a disaster almost every season. We're about to have another one potentially this weekend, and we just are recovering from an ice storm last weekend. And I've got this to deal with. What do I tell my citizens of western North Carolina? The result has not been the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal disaster spending. Instead, Secretary Noem's new review processes have indefinitely prolonged disaster recovery efforts across the country and inflicted needless pain onto already vulnerable communities and people. Yesterday in my office, I was notified that FEMA released more than $233 million in Helene-related reimbursements that are approved to move to North Carolina. This is great news. And these resources are severely needed in western North Carolina. However, When you dig into the details of an announcement, it becomes clear that this money is long overdue. Again, this list is just from yesterday's announcement alone. $200 million for North Carolina emergency management as partial reimbursement for their emergency expenses incurred in the first 6 months of Helene. Folks, we're well past 6 months, meaning this is only part of what the state is owed before March of 2025. We're in 2026, folks. Nearly $9 million for the Blue Ridge Electric Cooperative for repairing and replacing electric and fiber infrastructure. Great, glad to see it come. For comparison, this is roughly equivalent to what Blue Ridge Electric spent on fiber for the entire year in 2023. $1.8 million for the town lake. This is one I hope people pay attention to. $1.8 million for the town of Lake Lure to rebuild its marina and docks. For those that don't know, Lake Lure is some of the most iconic scenes that you're going to find in the movie Dirty Dancing. That's where that movie was filmed, out in western North Carolina. The entire economy depends on access to the lake through the marina. The Corps of Engineers recently finished removing more than 1 million cubic yards of debris just from the lake itself. After losing more than a year of tourism revenue, the town hopes to reopen the lake and the marina at some point in the spring or summer. This one award represents more than 20% of the town's general fund budget for this fiscal year, and it's just coming. $22 million for the NCDOT for road repairs. Again, much needed funding, but to put things in perspective, I don't know if you've not been through western North Carolina, I-40 is a 2-lane road now. It is not, it was down to a single lane at one point. We've managed to get 2 lanes. Everybody thought it was going to be done in a year and a half. I told everybody they're crazy. Now it looks like it's going to be 2027. It's going to cost $2 billion, twice what we thought it was, and we hope it gets open by 2027. It's trending more by 2028. So think about that. A major interstate section, a major economic corridor between my state and the presiding officer's state of Tennessee is at a trickle right now. That's the sort of damage we're experiencing every day in North Carolina. And yet, I've got a Secretary of Homeland Security who thinks at one point FEMA shouldn't even exist, and now running the organization like some amateur. So moving from yesterday's funding approvals, I want to share the plight of one of the 39 Helene-impacted counties in North Carolina, Yancey County. It's home to some of North Carolina's most cherished natural resources, including Mount Mitchell. If you want to win a bar bet, ask somebody what's the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. They're probably going to say Mount Washington or somewhere up in New England. It's actually in the great state of North Carolina at almost 6,700 feet, a little over. But Yancey County was at the epicenter of Hurricane Helene's impact in North Carolina. There's a good chance that if you remember any of the devastating images of the aftermath of Helene, you're probably thinking about Burnsville, the Yancey County seat. To date, Yancey County has incurred $50 million in debris removal, cost alone for hurricane, far exceeding the annual budget of the county of $37 million. You would think that today, more than 16 months after Helene, Yancey County would have received a significant amount of funding from FEMA to help recover from some of this historic devastation. Well, you'd be wrong under the so-called leadership of Secretary Noem. As of today, Yancey County received a grand total of $5.7 million from FEMA. Remember, we're talking about a $50 million debt right now, a $50 million deficit in a small county. $5.7 million. Of that, only $3 million of it was for debris removal. In fact, Yancey County has not even been approved for a $5 million community disaster loan that the county began application process for in October of 2024, after the hurricane impact. The county was told just last week that FEMA should have an answer for them by June of this year. Good on you, Secretary Noem. 2 years late. More than a year and a half after the storm, folks. This is completely unacceptable, and sadly, just wrong. So, Mr. President, it's not a secret that I have problems with the Secretary of Homeland Security and the way that her failed leadership has led to unconscionable results in Minneapolis. I thank the President for putting an adult in charge who actually knows law enforcement by having Mr. Homeland go there. He's going to lower the temperature. He's going to keep the law enforcement officers safe. He's going to make Minneapolis safer. Thank God we have adult supervision here. But another part of the Secretary of Homeland Security job is disaster response. And I cannot tell you enough how incompetent, based on the facts, that she is on that score as well. The people of Western North Carolina, the people of Eastern Tennessee, the people of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida who were affected by Helene deserve better. No reasonable business person would accept this in the C-suite. She needs to get out of the C-suite. Thank you, Mr. President.
If this kind of accountability reporting matters to you, subscribe now so you do not miss what happens next. What makes this hearing particularly striking is the contrast between the promise made in Batcave and the reality described in this report. The intention was to cut red tape. The outcome, at least according to critics, may be a different kind of bottleneck, when created not by career bureaucracy, but by centralized political control. She said the previous administration failed in many areas and promised that her department would learn from those failures and do better. At the time, that message resonated. Local leaders were desperate for faster action, fewer bureaucratic hurdles, and a recovery process that actually matched the urgency on the ground. She highlighted early actions taken under President Trump's second term, specifically the removal of what she described as red tape that had slowed disaster recovery in the past. If you find this kind of breakdown helpful, take a moment to subscribe so you can stay informed as these issues continue to unfold. Now fast forward to this week, and the picture looks very different. According to a new report from the New York Times, roughly $17 billion in federal disaster funding has been delayed over the past year. That is, if this kind of accountability reporting matters to you, subscribe now so you do not miss what happens next. What makes this hearing particularly striking is the contrast between the promise made in Batcave and the reality described in this report. The intention was to cut red tape. The outcome, at least according to critics, may be a different kind of bottleneck, when created not by career bureaucracy, but by centralized political control.